Well, happy Father's Day, dads. So glad that you're here with us, worshiping. And fathers, we have it rough sometimes, right? I knew that was coming. You don't dare say, no, mothers have it worse. Yeah, Dad, sometimes we have it tough. It's difficult. We don't always know what to do. We don't always know when to do it. I know it seems like Dad always knows what to do. Dad always knows what to say. We just got to follow Dad. He'll bring us through it. Well, sometimes I can tell you as a father of three, we don't always know what to do and always know what to say. However, the Bible does give us some guidelines, dads, of what to do and what to say. And so today I just want to talk about discipline for children. Now, this isn't going to apply to everybody because not everybody in here is a father. Not everybody in here is a mother. But if you are a child of God, you have experienced the discipline of God. And so we're going to look at that and tie the whole thing in together and make some observations about discipline, about fatherhood, and just how we can learn and grow from that together today. So hope you have your thinking and listening caps on as we jump into the Word. So go back to Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6, and we've been talking about this guy for the past couple weeks. You remember this guy? I forget what his name is. Lance? Did we name him Lance? Yeah. He asked Jackie out for a date today, and actually he asked her for a kiss, and he got turned down. He did. He said, Jackie, how about a kiss? And she said, no, thank you. She said, I'm waiting for marriage to kiss you. So I think he's going to try to get a ring for next week, but we'll see. But no, this guy has the armor of God. We've been talking about him for the past couple of weeks. We're still in Ephesians chapter 6, which is the passage about the armor of God. So if you'll turn there, and you need to calm down, so you're just going to sit over here. You're not really our topic today, okay? All right, so Ephesians chapter 6. We're in the first part of Ephesians chapter 6, not about that, but about parents and children and relationships. So let's read Ephesians 6, verse 1. It says, Children, where are you? Children, raise your hand. There's one. There's one. Hello. Anybody? Yeah, thanks, Joan. All right, so we got you guys. And there's another one. I see him. Are you holding up an L? Thanks, buddy. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Boys, did you hear me? What did I say? Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Good job. Okay, so that's all we have to say to you today. The rest is going to be for your parents. Well, actually, it does say honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and that you may live a long time or live long on the earth, it says. Dads, fathers, listen. Gavin, you're a father, right? To be, there's a baby. It's the size of a jalapeno pepper. And that's my grandbaby. We don't know if it's a boy or girl yet. I'm pretty sure it's a girl. But we'll find out. But this is for you, Gavin. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Okay? But bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Okay, so we look at this passage, and really I want to focus on fathers. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. And a lot of times we just do that first part, and we say, well, dads, don't make your kids angry. Don't provoke them to anger. And there's things involved in that and how to make that. But we forget the second half of that verse. I think so many times the focus is on, don't provoke your children to anger. Don't provoke your children to anger. And so we kind of back off a little bit because we don't want to make them mad. The problem is, there's a second half, which says, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now that's a difficult thing. And it's a huge job. It's a huge job. What does the discipline of the Lord look like? What is the discipline of the Lord? Because as you can see, it says, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Both of those are of the Lord. That modifies both words, discipline of the Lord and instruction of the Lord. Okay? So how do we discipline our children? Turn to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. And this is about how God disciplines his children. How God disciplines his children. Okay? So turn to Hebrews, I keep saying that wrong. Turn to Hebrews chapter 12. And whoever's writing Hebrews, we don't know who it is, but whoever wrote Hebrews is talking here to the Christians in the various places. And he is saying in verse 4, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. Okay. In other words, he's kind of admonishing them, the people that he's writing to. And he's saying, you know what, you guys, in your striving against sin, you haven't resisted to the point of shedding blood. Okay? You're fighting against sin in your own lives, and you're not resisting that hard, right? You're not bleeding. That's what he's saying. You're resisting sin, but not to the point where you've shed any blood. No blood, no foul, basically, we might say today. So he says, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. But he says, and you have forgotten, in verse 5, the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. Now this is their relationship with God. And he says, my son, this is an Old Testament passage. Excuse me. Do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. Ooh. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline, for the moment, seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields a peaceful fruit of righteousness. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Okay, dads, this is how we discipline our children. We take a page out of God's book, literally and figuratively. This is how God disciplines his children. And Paul is making a comparison between how earthly fathers are supposed to discipline their earthly children. This is how our Heavenly Father disciplines his earthly children. So we have at least 5 ways that discipline is supposed to take place. So if you're a dad, pay attention. This is kind of a theoretical discipline lesson. Okay, so are you ready? Ready? All right. All right. By the way, this doesn't have to be exclusive to fathers. Women, mothers can also discipline their children as well. As a matter of fact, they should. But primarily, the father would take that responsibility to bring up his child in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. We're not going to really talk about the instruction of the Lord today, but we're talking about the discipline of the Lord, okay? The instruction of the Lord would be what you would teach your child in God, in Christ. So, five points of discipline for your children, kind of how you would discipline. Here we go. Number 1, it has to happen. It has to happen. This is in verses 7, 8, and 9 of Hebrews chapter 12. And we're going to predominantly be in Hebrews chapter 12. It has to happen. You have to discipline your kids. Verse 7, Actually, let's go back up. In verse 6, for those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines. He disciplines. And he scourges every son whom he receives. Wow. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. So evidently they were going through some trials in the Hebrew group, wherever these people are. They're scattered all over. God is dealing with them as he would with sons. They are going through some sorrowful or grief, difficulty, some painful experiences. And actually what was happening is that is the Lord disciplining his children, right? And so he makes the point, it is for discipline, verse 7, that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. And here's the question, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline? Right? We would say, well, there's probably a lot of kids that aren't disciplined today, right? Probably a lot of children that aren't disciplined, and they need to be, and it's a difficult process. But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. See, the author here is saying, you know, it has to happen. No father would not discipline his son. Actually, what happens today, that's called neglect, right? If a father does not discipline his child. He says, verse 9, furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? To be subject to someone. Now, you might think, well, my kid's just not that bad. My kid is nice. My kid doesn't really disrespect me. I hardly ever have to raise my voice to my child. That's probably an only child, by the way. How many of you are only children? Raise your hand. Yeah, I can tell. Yeah. I'm just kidding. You're lovely people. But there's something about brothers and sisters that makes it a little bit more of a challenge sometimes. And all the siblings said, Amen. Yeah, my little sister is here today, by the way. Wave. That's Bethany. That's my sister. And my mom's here too. But it has to happen. We have to discipline our children. Go to Luke chapter 2. You think, well, my son or my daughter is not that bad. I just got to explain things to them and they'll just listen. They don't even do that much wrong. I don't really need to discipline them. Well, I'll tell you about a perfect kid, and you see if he had to be subject to his parents. It was Jesus. Now, his parents, verse 41 of Luke chapter 2, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it. Whoops. But supposed him to be in the caravan and went a day's journey, and they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. He's lost. Then after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When they saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you. This is not just like you go to the mall and your child, you miss it for like a little bit, few minutes, and you're like, panic. This is, they walk for a day back home. They realize he's not with us. They walk back for day 2. They start looking in Jerusalem for 1, 2, 3 days. Jesus has been missing for a week almost. 5 days, anxiously looking. And he is just chilling out, having a good time, hanging out in the temple. Just loves to be in his Father's house, his heavenly Father. And they come back and they said, Son, right? She's pulling her hair out. God gave us one job, raise the Son of God. And he said to them, why is it that you were looking for me? What are you looking for me for? We might say today. Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house? They were beside themselves. And he says, why are you looking for me? Didn't you know? But they didn't understand the statement which he made to them. What are you talking about? And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them, and his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. So Jesus did subject himself to his parents and to their discipline, even though he didn't do anything wrong. How do we know Jesus didn't do anything wrong? Because he's Jesus. He's Jesus. He can't do anything wrong. So even Mary and Joseph had to have some boundaries, and Jesus subjected himself to those boundaries, right? He continued in subjection to them, coming underneath. So he obeyed. So that's the first part of discipline, how to discipline your children in the Lord. It has to happen. The second part of discipline is that it must not provoke them to anger. It must not provoke them to anger. So now we can go back to Ephesians chapter 6. Keep your finger there in your Hebrews 11. But go back to Ephesians chapter 6. Where it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. In Colossians, the same version, or the same, like a parallel version of this, it says, fathers, don't exasperate your children. Otherwise, they might lose heart. So the idea here is don't provoke your children to jealousy, to anger. Actually, in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it says, like, there's a huge link between provoking them to anger and jealousy. Like when we provoke God to anger, like the children of Israel did, it was jealous type anger. So I would think one of the big ways that you can provoke your kids to anger is by showing favorites among your children. Dads, I think that's pretty clear. When did we see that? Favoritism in the Bible? Has there ever been favoritism among parents in the Bible? Fathers? Absolutely. Joseph, right? And how did his brothers, how did they respond to that favoritism that was showed to Joseph? Well, they got angry enough to contemplate murder of their brother, angry enough to beat him up and sell him into slavery, right? They got provoked because favoritism was shown. Jacob and Esau, another type of favoritism with Jacob and his parents back and forth. The favoritism there, the mother favoring the one, the father favoring the other, causing deception, causing anger where Esau said, I'm going to kill him. You see what happens? So parents, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger. Don't favor one child over the other. That doesn't mean, by the way, that doesn't mean, well, I guess I better cool off on my love for all of these kids, right? I'm showing too much love for this one, so I'll not show as much love for that one. That's not the answer, is it? What's the answer? I better show more love for my other kids. Right? And it's not enough to know that you feel a certain way, that you love them all. They have to know you love them all. It's not enough. They have to know you love them all equally. Okay? So just remember that. That favoritism, if one thinks they're being favored, there's something called a love language book. You ever heard of Gary Chapman, Love Languages, 5 Love Languages? Raise your hand if you've heard of that. Raise your hand if you've not heard of that. Okay, that is a book that came out, a while ago, probably 30 years ago. And that talks about 5 predominant ways in which people feel and express love. And some of these ways don't apply to others. So some people when they feel like a child feels certain kind of love, they feel love, and they just want to give you a present. And that's a gift, right? Other people, they just want to spend time with you, sit down with you on the couch and talk and tell you about their day. That'd be quality time. Another would be, look, I polished all your silverware, or do some kind of act of service, right? They want to help you weed the garden. They just like to help and do the dishes and take out the trash. Other people like touch, like a hug. They come up and a kid wants to give you a hug and physical touch. And then others like words. Oh, mommy, oh, daddy, you're just so nice. I love you so much. And da-da-da-da. And they say all kinds of wonderful things, right? Sometimes in those love languages, some people feel and express love in a certain way of those 5 things. Others don't feel it. So I would suggest to you, learn your kids' love language and express it to them. Each of my children have a different love language, and I've tried to express love, my love for them, in their love language. It's very important. It's something worth looking into. If you need more information, you can talk to me after the service. But don't provoke your children to anger. Instead, show them love. Don't show favoritism. Don't overly tease your kids. You can joke here and there, but don't get them to the point where they're fuming mad. Don't exasperate them. Don't stir them up, it says. And we don't want to be arbitrary in our discipline, and we don't want to be humiliating in our discipline. You've ever seen those videos where the kids are getting their head shaved because they're doing something wrong, and the dad says, oh yeah, well, I'm going to shave your head. I don't like that stuff. That's just humiliating the kid for the sake of humiliation, and I'm not sure that's more likely to provoke someone to anger rather than teach a valuable lesson. I learned this when I was a youth pastor. You can't make fun of someone into obedience. Can I say that again? You can't make fun of someone into obedience. What do I mean by that? You can't tease someone into being good. Tease in a negative way. Tease, make fun of, mock, get them to realize how stupid they are for disobeying by making fun of them. You might get compliance, okay? You might get them to go along with, okay, fine, some kid is cutting up in your class. I was 19 years old when they gave me a youth group. That was probably a bad idea. I was pretty young. I was 19 years old and I was teaching teenagers, right? And I was still a teenager myself. And I probably needed a few more years on me. But one of the first mistakes I made when I was disciplining and working with these kids, they would try to be funny. They would make a joke, and they would distract the class. I'm trying to teach, and I was so focused. We got to learn this lesson. And so I would just make fun of them back. They're giving me sass. Well, I'm going to make fun of them worse until they're quiet and they pay attention. Well, what happens? Well, now they're a bunch of defeated kids, and they're only listening so they don't get made fun of. How do they feel about the lesson? What's their emotional state at that point? Shame, humiliation, not good, right? It didn't take me very long to realize you make some enemies, and you don't really affect change when you're doing that. And so it took me maybe 6 months to realize, let's not make fun of these kids when we're teaching them, right? And that's what we're supposed to do as adults, as parents as well. Not tease them, not provoke them to anger. So it has to happen. It must not provoke anger. Number 3, it must come from love. Our discipline must come from love. Back to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. So if the Lord loves you, guess what? He's going to discipline you. Everyone. We've all become partakers. How does the Lord discipline us? Through painful circumstances, sorrowful things that happen to us, that he allows in our lives to train us for righteousness. That's what it says in James chapter 1. We've been talking with the young people upstairs about James chapter 1 and how we're supposed to consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you encounter various trials. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces what? Endurance, steadfastness. Yeah. But the Lord loves us, and that's why he disciplines us. In the same way, if a father loves a son or a daughter, the best thing they can do is discipline that child when they misbehave. It must come from love. Children are sensitive, and they must get the sense that you love them and you're not just trying to get at them, okay, when you're disciplining. I would often ask my kids that. Now they're all above 18, so, discipline's over. Now it's just influence at this stage in our lives. I don't discipline Matthew, right? If Matthew doesn't take out the trash, I don't say, "Come here, son." Right? I don't spank Matthew. He's 23 and he could probably beat me up. But it's not, it has to come from love. And you ask your kids, you tell them, you reinforce with them, why am I doing this? Why am I saying this? Why are you receiving this discipline? Because you don't like me. No, you know that's not true. Right? Why are you missing out on this fun thing as you're getting older, Why, let's say your kid misses curfew, right? They're older, they come back late, so you don't let them go to the big dance the next day. Why am I doing that? Because you don't want me to have fun. Okay, you know that's not true, right? You know I love you and I want you to be trained by this. I'm not trying to get at you. I'm not trying to make fun of you. Why would I tell you this? Why would I say this? It's because I love you and I want what's best for you. It has to come from love. My kids are feeling uncomfortable. Are you crossing you're like, no? Oh, okay. I misread that. Why am I doing I love you and I don't want you to be undisciplined. I don't want you to lead a wild life that is unrighteous, right? It has to come from love. Number 4, it must teach respect. It must teach respect. Back in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 9, it says, "Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live?" Discipline must teach respect. Don't let your children disrespect you. Paul says our fathers disciplined us and we respected them. That comes with it. Your father, kids, is not a joke. And discipline needs to teach you that. And we need to teach them to respect their father, honor their father. You're not a joke. You're not a bro. Bro, come on, man. Let me do it. Bro. That's fine, like if you're joking around, you're having fun once in a while, but your dad is not your bro. Your dad is your father. He deserves your respect. Fathers, don't let your kids disrespect their mothers. Don't let your kids disrespect their mothers. Don't let them talk back to their mom. In fact, if I hear a kid, and this is probably, I don't know, I might overstep a little bit, but if I hear a kid disrespecting his mother in public, I say something to the kid. I say, "Whoa, hey, don't talk to your mom like that." I'll say that to other people's kids if I hear it. It's not right. Honor your father and mother. So if I hear you disrespect your mom, I'm going to say something. Okay? So don't do it. Dads, don't let them do it. Don't let them call her bro. Right? Don't let them make fun of her. When she says, "Do the dishes," don't let them go, "No, I can't. I don't want to." The dishes, I'll never forget. This is a horrible thing, and I hated it, but I knew it's necessary now. My mom asked me to do the dishes once. Actually, she asked me to do the dishes about 1,000 times. But let's just say once. And I hated loading the dishwasher. Hated it. The dishes were dirty. People had slobbered on them. I had to get I hate getting my hands messy. And I'm washing them off on the plate, and I'm like, this is so stupid. And I'm just mumbling out loud to myself and anyone that will listen why I hate doing this. But I'm doing it. but I'm being disrespectful. All of a sudden, my 6'5" father, out of nowhere, I'm on the ground, and I'm like, with my arms wrapped behind me, and he's on top, and he is, knock it off! And I'm like, uh-oh. Because I was disrespecting my mom. And he was like, are you going to knock it off? I'm like, yes! Don't let your children disrespect their mothers. So then I got up, loaded the rest of the dishwasher, and I didn't disrespect my mom. Right? I wasn't beaten. I wasn't hit across the room. I was just restrained. And I was young enough. And it took hold. Make sure they respect you and their mother. And we need to be respectful. Don't be leading disrespectful lives either, dads. You should be someone that your children respect. Don't be falling down drunk. Don't be running around town with other women. Don't be, do things that are respectful to be worthy of the respect that they ought to give you. Make it easier for them, not harder. And then last of all, it must be sorrowful. It must be sorrowful. This is what it says in verse 11 of Hebrews 12. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it afterwards, it yields that peaceful fruit of righteousness. Discipline is supposed to be sorrowful. It is supposed to make you feel sorry that you did the thing that you did. Okay? Now, that word means cause grief. It means sadness or mourning. It means pain, but typically it means emotional pain. It doesn't always necessarily mean physical pain. And I know there's some people in some situations that you cannot physically discipline your children. I've worked with some of the guys, in the past I've worked with some guys in jail, and they can't physically discipline their kids, right? And so you have to, but even if their discipline is putting them in a corner or taking their phone away or not letting them go to the thing, whatever it is has to cause sorrow to the child. Okay? It has to cause some kind of anguish, but not permanent, right? And not actual anguish. It just seems like it, right? Read that verse again carefully. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. It's momentary, and it just seems to be sorrowful. It's not actual. You don't actually kill their dog or something, right? It's not real. Like, you don't actually, right, cause them real grief. It's just, to them, what they care about, when our kids, and I haven't asked permission to share this, but I will anyway, our kids, they kind of like staying in their rooms, and they love being in there reading. And so if Matthew did wrong, and you would say, go to your room. He'd be like, yes, and go and read a book, right? So we kind of got to the point where this is not having an effect, okay? So now, guess what? Sit at the kitchen table with no book. That's your punishment. Ugh. It has to be sorrowful. It has to be something that they lose, that they don't want to lose, something that's going to cause them some suffering. But it's not permanent, it's not excessive, it's not abuse. You have to be very careful when you're disciplining. But for the moment, it's got to be sorrowful. And then that brings us to our conclusion. It says in verse 11 there, but to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields a peaceful fruit of righteousness. If you are trained by it, you will, right? You will yield that fruit of righteousness. We must yield to the discipline of the Lord. This is not just for dads anymore. This is not just for moms. If you are a child of God, if you have accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and you're a child of God, guess what? You experience discipline from the Lord. He disciplines you. Your suffering that you go through is discipline for the sins that you commit in your life. It's not always that, but you have experienced it at some point. If you're truly a child of God, you have been disciplined by the Lord, or you will be if you just got saved like yesterday, right? And so we need to examine ourselves. And he gives us two things at the beginning of that passage, right? He says, don't regard the discipline of the Lord lightly, right? Don't think, that's nothing. So pay attention when you go through suffering. Look for, is there sin in my life? Confess it to the Lord and ask for forgiveness and move forward. But then he says, don't faint. Don't faint from it. Like, oh no, it's the end of the world. Some kids are more sensitive than others, and if you just have an angry look at them, they cry, right? Don't faint from discipline. It's not the end of the world. You're not going to hell. If you're a child of God, you're not going to hell, right? So don't faint, but be trained by it and let that fruit of righteousness spring up in you. So I've gone through some suffering in my life. When I was 14, I had my wisdom teeth pulled. Okay, big deal. It kind of hurt. I remember it. When I was 18, I broke my knee playing soccer. That hurt. And I dealt with that injury for most of my life here. When I was 19, I was in a bad car accident. I had 18 stitches that I put my head through the side windshield. And I've allowed the Lord to humble me through those things. I've not always paying attention, but some of those I do pay attention. Those are some of the big things in my life that I notice and I remember. The Lord got a hold of me in those situations. Recently, changing jobs, having to deal with that 5 years ago, 4 years ago. That was difficult. The Lord was dealing with me in those situations. And then COVID, everybody locked up for a while. That was the Lord dealing with us. And then heart surgery, having to deal with that. You suppose that's the Lord's discipline? Could be. Could very well be. I wasn't taking something seriously enough or disobeying him in some way. Pay attention to those things. So each of us, when we endure suffering, when we go through it, let it yield its fruit in our lives. Look for the lessons. Now, rarely, your suffering has nothing to do with your discipline. Sometimes God has just proven a point to Satan, like he did with Job, right? But a lot of the times, it is to do with something we have not done right. But you can't assume someone else's discipline when you look at them. You just have to think about yourself for those things.